Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Douglas, the teaching pastor at the 456 Church. So glad that you joined us this week for our community gathering video. We are halfway through, well now we're 3/4 of the way through our relationship series here in June. We've been basing that off of Ephesians 5, and Paul has been talking to the church about their disunity in chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then reminding them to be unified in Christ in chapters 4, 5, and 6. And he is telling them that one of the ways that they can be unified in Christ, one of the ways that they can imitate Christ, one of the ways that, to use the language that he uses, to walk in a manner worthy of Christ, or to walk as though wise, is to submit to each other, to serve one another. And so we spent a couple of weeks talking about what that looks like in marriage. And this past Sunday, we talked about what that looks like in a parent-child relationship. If you're a parent, you know that it is very easy for us to kind of default to our preferences, our tendencies, the things that we like, the things that we prefer, and try to conform our children to basically us, right? The aim, though, scripturally, is to conform our children into the image of Christ and to show our children who Christ is, to have our children exhibit the character of Jesus rather than our character. And so here's what we had on tap this past week. Our theology was God desires people to have a relationship with Him. And the reason that was our theology, it feels normal for us to talk about that, to know that God desires people to have a relationship with Him. But I think that sometimes we miss that with our kids. So that was kind of why we emphasized that as our theology, is that God's desire for our kids is to have a relationship with Him. And then so our application this past week was we should seek to have our kids know Jesus. And to broaden that a little bit like we did on Sunday, we should seek to have our kids know and act like Jesus, to follow Jesus, right? And our prayer this past week was, God, may our children come to know you richly and follow you passionately. And I think that really is the heart of the believing parent, right? Is that their child would come to know Jesus and follow Jesus passionately. I've mentioned this before, but I won't ever forget finding out that we were expecting our first kid, and Michelle shoved a pregnancy test in my face and woke me up from sleep to let me know that she had found out that we were expecting our first kid. And our immediate response was just a prayer that whatever this child was, male or female, that whoever this child was going to be, that this child would know Jesus. That was our first prayer, and ended up being Asher, and Asher has come to know Jesus, and Riker has come to know Jesus, and for that we are incredibly grateful. Still, though, as a parent, it's really easy, isn't it, to try to make our children behave like we want them to. Suddenly, a plate full of broccoli carries more weight than the character of Jesus. And we have these rules and we have these guidelines. Now listen, we talked about this a little bit Sunday, and I hope that you'll continue to discuss this in your home at the conclusion of this video, but I don't let my kids play on the highway that we live next to. And that's not because if you play on the highway, you don't look like Jesus, and if you don't play on the highway, you look more like Jesus. It's not that at all. It's an issue of safety, right? And so there are cars flying down this highway at 70 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, and for the safety of my kids, I'm not going to let them go out there. And I tell them when they go out, hey, just watch out for the road. Just be sure you're not throwing the ball into the highway, right? Those kinds of things. And so we're not talking about things like that, but we're really talking about our preferences. We're talking about trying to get our kids. So one of the examples that I give a lot is that Riker, our youngest, there are times that he just doesn't want to eat and he's just not hungry. And so early on when we would parent him, we kind of, I guess, viewed that as rebellion, like, hey, it's dinner time, now you need to eat, so eat right now. And we would make him sit at the table. Really, I mean, it was me. I don't think Michelle really did that, but I would make him sit at the table for like an hour until he ate every bite of his dinner. And then one day it just dawned on me, like, I'm totally doing that. I'm exasperated. He's exasperated. We both feel this frustration and this tension. Every time it would roll around to dinner time, we would feel frustration and tension. Riker and I each would. It was obvious. And I wondered, is tonight going to be another battle? And ultimately what I realized is I am making a big deal about something that has no weight in eternity. I am making a big deal about something that doesn't have any bearing on Riker's eternal salvation. And really all it's doing is causing each of us to be frustrated with the other. And on a more practical note, there are times that I'm not hungry at dinner time. There are times that I don't eat until later, or there are days that I'm just not as hungry or whatever. And here I am expecting my kid to eat when I tell him to eat, because that's what's convenient for me. And so what we started doing is, or again, Michelle was always gracious, but what I started doing is recognizing that yes, my son needs to eat. That's important for his body, but he doesn't have to eat this minute. And so there would be days that he'd be like, Dad, I'm just not hungry. And instead of forcing him to sit there for an hour until he ate his dinner, what I would do instead is say, okay, buddy, I'll put it away for you. And when you're hungry, let me know. And sometimes he was hungry later, and sometimes he wouldn't eat until the following morning at breakfast. But the point being that because it's not an issue of eternity, because it's not an issue of Christ, I didn't want to make it an issue with my son. And so we started to correct those behaviors. And so it's really necessary for us to be careful the rules that we add onto our children, the standards that we attach to our children. It's really necessary that we're careful that what we're doing is setting up for our children the standard of Christ rather than the standard of self. And so this is a conversation that I really don't expect us to be able to completely settle in these 7.5, 8 minutes. I don't even expect us to be able to completely digest it over the next few weeks in our small groups or whatever. But I do hope that right now we can begin to have the conversation. What is the aim for our children? What is God's aim for our children? God's aim for our children is that they would know Him. What is our aim for our children? It should be that they would know God. And so cut yourself a little bit of slack, right? As a parent, cut your kids a little bit of slack, and then make sure that your aim and your children's aim are the same, and that is that we are people who know and honor Jesus. I have 3 questions for you that I just want you to consider. I hope this first question will kind of be fun. The first question is, what kinds of stereotypical struggles do parents and children face? And the reason that I think that this should kind of be a fun question is I want you to think of it in terms of sitcoms. Like, think of all the sitcoms that you have come to love, that maybe you watched as a kid, maybe you watch now. Think of all the times that a silly sitcom tried to get really serious, about like partying or alcohol or whatever, and it just felt awkward or whatever it is. But like, think of all the stereotypical struggles that parents and children face, and kind of list some of those. Talk about some of those that we kind of just hold as these are just normal conflicts between parents and children. Second thing I want you to do is ask yourself this question and discuss it among yourselves. But why do parents try to create children who model them? Why is that our tendency? Why is it our tendency to try to make carbon copies of who we are first, rather than make carbon copies of Christ? Why is that? And I suspect it's because we believe that the ideas and the perspectives that we have are right. And so we're trying to do that, right? We're trying to make them be more like us. But anyway, why do parents try to create children who model them or mimic them? And then the third question is, what areas do you see in your own life where you might need to emphasize your preferences less and the character of Jesus more? So not just in your parenting, but in your own personal life, what are some areas that you feel you might need to de-emphasize the preference of self and maximize or more emphasize the character of Jesus? And so take some time to really think on that one. Really try to examine, if you are a parent, really try to examine your parenting and evaluate it under these 2 things. Is this because of it's my preference, or is this because it's creating the character of Jesus? And let that be something that really let that question kind of sit with you for a little bit before you dive into an answer. Thanks so much for watching. We look forward to seeing you again. We're so glad that we're able to meet in person again. And so don't forget to join us live next Sunday as we finish up this relationship series. We love you. If there's anything we can do for you, let us know. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.